Hey you guys, this is Jessica and Noam, and we're here today at Trax Recording in Chicago with Reverb for another episode of What's That Sound? And today we are going to be recreating the sounds of Run-DMC's Pied Piper.
They recorded this with an 808 drum machine and with a bunch of samples that they chopped up. We decided to do it with actual drums because of goofs.
So for our drums today, we have a Ludwig Vista-like kick drum stuffed with a blanket or a sleeping bag, and then we have a CB snare drum, a 13-inch CB snare.
I found it in the trash.
That he found in the trash with a 12-inch drum head flipped upside down on the top of it. And then for our hi-hats, we have 14-inch K Dark Zildjian cymbals, hi-hats, and we had our friend Percy hold them so that there would be absolutely no overtones or resonance from them.
All right, so I know what you're asking. Why did you do this thing? Why did you recreate 808 samples with actual drums? The internet needed it. You guys needed us to do it. There wasn't enough 808 samples out there. There was one too few, and we had to make this one. It doesn't sound exactly like an 808. It sounds 808-like. It was played live, so it has its own kind of live feel. And it has a unique characteristic that I think sounds really, really cool. For this sound, we're processing it so heavily that like the mics kind of don't matter, to be honest, but we ended up using a FET 47 on the kick drum, we used an AKG 414 on the snare, and as an overhead, we used a Noam U47. Who cares? In order to do this, we had to listen to 808s and figure out what is it about an 808 that makes it sound like an 808. So for the kick drum, to get the knock, we stuck a FET 47 just outside of the kick drum, right? That picked up like the mid-range, that gets the punch that we need. When we took a look at the low end, we realized that we needed something to generate low end that was not a kick drum, right? The 808 low end is essentially a pure sine wave tone, right? So the way that we decided to have that happen from an acoustic drum is we used a sine tone generator at 50 hertz. Now that sine tone generator was just a constant sine tone, and we, on top of that, to give it shape, we added a noise gate. That noise gate is triggered off of the actual kick drum. So every time the kick drum hits, the noise gate opens up, and then it closes based on the release of the noise gate, right? So we could control what the length of the kick drum was based on that release time. Through that pretty much took care of all of our low end, and we ended up with a full kick drum sound. All right, so here is just our kick and our snare alone. This is what was recorded in the room. All right, so let's listen to the signal generator for the kick drum. This is just a sine wave, no noise gate, just to hear what the raw material sounds like. It's nothing. Sounds like nothing, right? I added a little bit of distortion right there, and then let's add our gate onto it. Okay, now that sounds like something, right? We're gonna add a little bit, just a tiny bit of EQ. Let's add in our kick drum microphone. Okay. The snare drum sound of an 808 is super unnatural. It doesn't sound anything like what a snare drum sounds in the room. So we knew that we would need a really weird snare drum to make it happen. And we knew that we would probably need some kind of synthesized material happening with it. So we found this snare drum. I literally found it in a dumpster, and it is a god-awful snare drum. It sounds horrible. But if you crank it as high as it'll possibly go and then stick a bunch of tape all over it and stick drum heads on top and stick wallets on top and stick everything that you own on top of this snare drum, it sounds like a passable sound. It sounds kind of like an 808, right, on its own. So we took that as our base of the sound. It's really short, so it doesn't quite have the decay of an 808, and it's a little dark, so it doesn't quite have the high end of an 808 snare drum, but it has the meat, and that's really all we needed to get from it. To complete the sound, we did basically the same thing that we did with the kick drum. We got a noise generator. This time we used a little bit of a sine wave, and we also used a bit of white noise that we had filtered to kind of have the EQ curve that we want. And we gated that based off of the snare drum input. So every time the snare drum hit, we would get this little burst of white noise. This is the snare drum without any of the signal generators that we were using. The snare drum has a little bit of a delay on it that I just use just to give it a little bit of texture. Without that delay, sounds like this. With the delay, it sounds like that. I'm also using a little bit of an envelope follower to lower the attack on that snare drum so that it sounds even just a little bit more unnatural. It sounds pretty cool. It's kind of a all attack now, right? There isn't a lot of decay to it. So we need to use our signal generators to add a little bit of decay. I'm going to play you a little bit of each signal generator just to show you what it sounds like without the gates, and then we'll add the gates to them. All right, here's signal generator number 1. Sounds like that. Signal generator number 2. Great, more noise. Then signal generator number 3. Cool. Perfect. Now let's put gates on that and let's see if it starts sounding like an actual drum. Okay. So that's starting to work. Let's add a little bit of EQ to that to really get it to pop out a little more. Beautiful. And then, because in the original sound we had some reverb, we'll add a little bit of reverb to those sounds. Now here's the whole snare drum together. All right, here's kick and snare together. After we recorded the kick and snare, we needed to record the hi-hat. We didn't do them together because the hi-hat sounded a little bit too natural when we tried to record them together. So we recorded the hi-hat as an overdub so that we can filter out all the low end and make it sound really, really 808-y artificially. We also, you could probably guess, added a little bit of a noise generator to the hi-hat to add a little bit of length to it to make it feel even a little bit more unnatural. The hi-hat sound for an 808 is super, super tight. We tried closing it with our feet. That wasn't tight enough. We tried sticking physical clamps on it and clamping down as hard as it'll go. That wasn't enough. Ultimately, our friend Percy went in and held the hi-hat as hard as he could while Jessica played. Here's the raw sound. That sounds just like regular hi-hats. So we added a ton of EQ on top of that to make it sound really, really thin, really artificial. So that's with our EQ. On top of that EQ sound, we added a envelope follower that took off some of the attack and also took off some of the decay. For this one, we use Smack Attack, but you could use a transient designer or anything like that. So here's with that envelope follower on it. Just a little smoother, a little shorter, and a little less natural sounding. Now, obviously, it's a little bit short to be an 808 hi-hat, right? So we had to, again, use a noise generator, and we triggered it off of the natural hi-hat sound. So here's with the noise generator. Starts to feel like an 808 hi-hat. All right, so here's our entire 808 beat before we add any of the sampley stuff. Sounds fantastic. So this would like kind of make up the verse section of the Run-DMC song. On the choruses of this record, it sounds like they sampled some kind of breakbeat. So we had Jessica play a similar breakbeat and we kind of recreated that just through processing it. We did this just with a single microphone. This was an AKG 414. I just stuck it right in front of the kit. So let's listen to the breakbeat without any processing on it. Super boring. Sounds dumb. Let's add EQ onto it to make it cool. It sounds cool, but it needs some excitement, so let's add some compression to it. Feels cool, feels exciting. It's very kind of closed in and focused. Let's add a little bit of imaging to it just to make it wider, and we're gonna add a little bit of, just a tiny bit of reverb just to put it a little bit further back in the mix. So the last element that we had to add to this drum sound was the bells. They've used some kind of bell. We were just kind of banging stuff and hit cups that sounded kind of similar to this. So that's what we used today. We filled the cups with water so that we could adjust the pitch and tune it to the track. All right, here are the cups. I added some tape saturation just to make them a little vibier and make them have a bit of texture to them. All right, that's the last element. Let's take a listen to the whole thing together.
All right, so that was another episode of What's That Sound? Please let us know in the comments what other songs you would like to see us break down in the future. And thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.